ready for the jury? All right, you be seated and redirect.
Good afternoon, Mr. Depp.
Hi.
Could we please pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 1? Mr. Depp, is this the version of the op-ed that you recognize?
Yes, ma'am. That's the one.
I would move Exhibit 1, Plaintiff's Exhibit 1 into evidence and ask that it be published to the jury.
Any objection? No objection. All right, 1 in evidence and publish.
Mr. Depp, when did you see Ms. Heard's December 18th, 2018 op-ed for the first time?
It was presented to me by one of my team. I can't remember, but it was within a day or so of it. A couple of days of it having been written, I believe.
And what was your reaction when you saw it?
Shock.
Why were you shocked?
Because at that point, it had been a good solid two or so years of this, of the accusations, of the allegations, planted firmly on my back, so something that I had to carry with me. And I just couldn't believe that it was continuing. That it was continuing in such a way that it was clear that the more bad press, the more hit pieces that came out on me, the more of these stories of Ms. Heard and her righteous chase against me. It wasn't stopping, and it's difficult to once you've chewed on it for a couple of years, it becomes pretty difficult to swallow anymore. As it was completely untrue.
How did you feel when you saw the op-ed for the first time?
Objection asked and answered just now.
My prior question was about his reaction.
All right, I'll allow it.
Hurts. Yeah, a blinding hurt. It was like somebody had hit me in the back of the head with a 2x4. And as it said, I had no ability to speak prior to, because even if I had done an interview to try to explain myself, it turned into a hit piece. So my mouth was shut. And this was the opportunity where I thought, something's got to be done. It's just got to be done. I couldn't take it anymore.
When did you first learn that Disney was not going to recast you in the Pirates franchise?
It was probably 2 or 3 days after this op-ed appeared. One of my crew, again, I don't remember who had sent me, excuse me, had sent me a piece that was in some magazine, and Sean Bailey, who was the number 3.
Objection, hearsay.
I don't know yet. I'll overrule it at this point.
Thank you.
May I continue, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Sean Bailey, who was the third in line, as I suppose, in the upper echelon of Disney, just basically said in the
Objection, hearsay.
Your
What
Honor,
Sean Bailey said.
this is about him
It's in
learning
an
about this. It's
article.
not for the truth.
It is the truth. She's
If
asking.
you want to approach, that's hard.
Mr. Depp, could you please explain to the jury who Sean Bailey is? I think you were starting to.
Yes, I'll try again. Sean Bailey is the number 3, or was at the time. I don't know what his status is anymore, but at the time he was the number 3 sort of upper echelon of Disney, top dogs, and Sean Bailey was quoted as saying that...
Objection, hearsay.
Mr. Depp, where was Sean Bailey quoted, without getting into what he was quoted as saying?
He was quoted in whatever the article was that that was brought to my attention.
And can you please just clarify what article you're referring to?
I don't know what journal it came from. I don't know what magazine. I don't know any of that, so I don't know who did the interview with him.
Objection, lack of foundation.
I'll overrule the objection. Go ahead.
Mr. Depp, how did you feel when you learned that you were being dropped from the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise?
Well, it was the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. It was a character that Captain Jack Sparrow was a character that I had built from the ground up, and was something that I of course put a lot of as you do with all characters, but you put a lot of yourself into the character. So, and also having worked on these films with these people and having added much of myself, much of my own rewriting of the dialogue and scenes and the jokes and whatever they are, I didn't quite understand how that, after that long relationship and quite a successful relationship, certainly for Disney, that they would, that suddenly I was guilty until proven innocent.
Up until the point that you learned that you were not going to be in the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise any longer, what was your intention with respect to future Pirates movies?
The last thing that I knew from I say there's the producer team, there's the creative team, and there were many discussions. I, in fact, had been approached to take part in writing
Objection,
Pirates
hearsay.
6.
Mr. Depp, what was your intention with respect to future Pirates movies, aside from what you'd been asked to do?
My feeling was that these characters should be able to have their proper goodbye, as it were. A franchise can only last for so long. There's a way to end a franchise like that, and I thought that the characters deserved to have their way out of to end the franchise on a very good note. I planned on continuing until it was time to stop.
Mr. Depp, last week, Mr. Rottenborn asked you about a quote where you said you wouldn't come back to the Pirates franchise for $300 million and a million alpacas. Do you remember that?
I do.
When relative to learning that you would no longer be a part of the Pirates franchise, did you make that statement?
I think long before I made the statement, there was a very deep and distinct sense of having been betrayed by the people that I had been working with, the people that I had worked hard for, the people that I had delivered a character to that they initially despised, but somehow, even I stuck to my guns with the character and it seemed to work. So,
do you recall when specifically you made that statement about the $300 million and the 100 alpacas?
Objection, asked and answered.
Overruled, I'll allow it.
I believe I made that statement during a press conference in the San Sebastian at the San Sebastian Film Festival when I was asked about my situation.
And what year would that have been, if you can recall?
I believe it was last year or so.
Can we please pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 804? Mr. Depp, do you recognize this document?
As soon as my eyes go on, I hopefully will. Scaramanga Brothers, yes. Pirates of the Caribbean, 4 and 5, yes.
What is this document?
I don't quite know. I'd have to read it to get some understanding of it.
Could we scroll through so Mr. Depp can look at the rest of this document?
Oops. Oh, there it goes. It looks, this appears to me to be some species of contract, you know?
Is this a contract that you entered into?
With Disney.
Your Honor, I'd ask that Plaintiff's Exhibit 804 be moved into evidence and published.
Any objection?
I think it's outside the scope of direct or cross-examination.
I'll overrule on that objection.
Okay, and I'll reserve other objections to portions of the document, depending on what she's going to ask about. Could be hearsay.
But she's asking to put it all into evidence right now.
Well, then I would object to that at this point.
All right, you want to come forward? Let's see. Okay. If I could just get a redacted copy of that at some point. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Depp, if I could direct your attention to Section 6 of the contract, which is on pages 8 through 10 of the document. Mr. Depp, what does this reflect?
Sorry. It appears to be the agreement of Pirates 4 and 5, compensation and merchandise.
Mr. Depp, at this time, how many other franchise films had you been a part of?
At that time, Alice in Wonderland. Alice in Wonderland. I'm so pathetic when it comes to knowing what movies I've done. I'm sorry. I just, I don't watch them. I feel better not watching them. I couldn't, what was the question again?
How many?
I have order in the court, or I will have you removed. Understood? Thank you.
How many other franchise films had you been a part of at the time of this contract?
There was a third. There was Pirates. There was, with Warner Brothers, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, and then Crimes of Grindelwald.
And how does the compensation reflected in this contract compare to that, what you receive for the other franchises that you've been a part of?
Objection, foundation.
He just established that he was a member of other franchise films at this point.
And he hasn't established a foundation that he knows how he was compensated for this.
I'll overrule the objection if you can answer.
I believe the compensation, obviously, all the pay and back end and all those things are negotiated by agents, lawyers, and this was comparatively, this is my salary on that film, and other salaries were of a similar status, I suppose.
If I could direct your attention to the 12th page of the document.
Yes. Oh,
Is this your signature, Mr. Depp?
yes, it is.
Okay. We can take this down. Thank you. Mr. Depp, I recall that you testified that you don't know during a given period what movies you were working on. So my question is, who would know that?
Well, first and foremost, is my agent, or agents. I do recall a couple of the other films that I'd made after. One was initially called Richard Says Goodbye, and that was, they changed the name to The Professor, and during all of the nastiness over the past 6 years, that film went straight to pay-per-view. There was another film called Minamata that was produced. It was my company, Infinitum Nile. We had developed a film called Minamata about Eugene Smith, and the Minamata, the mercury poisoning of a very small fishing village in southern Japan. There was that one, and then there was a film called Waiting for the Barbarians with Mark Rylance and Robert Pattinson. Those were 3 films that I had done.
Mr. Depp, during your cross-examination, Mr. Rottenborn showed you a number of text messages between you and Paul Bettany. Do you remember that?
I do.
Could you please explain to the jury what your relationship with Mr. Bettany is?
Mr. Bettany and I had, we'd met while I was making a film called The Tourist in Venice, and we were, it was an instant connection. He's born and bred in the UK and has that English sort of dry, kind of obtuse, abstract sense of humor. And that was one of the things that we connected on, is taking, even if it was a difficult or unpleasant situation, we would, do our best to deal with it with humor, as opposed to just a constant complaint or whining or anything of that nature. We dealt with it with humor, albeit sometimes as these are private texts that have been, there was a lot of in context. It's important to know that none of it was ever intended to be real, and the language that's used, which I am ashamed that that has to be spread on the world like peanut butter. For example, the text that is about burning Ms. Heard it's directly from Monty Python in the sketch about burning witches and then drowning the witches. This is This is a film that we'd all watched when we were 10, and it's just irreverent and abstract humor. That's what we were referring to in those texts.
The text message that you just referenced, other than Mr. Bettany, who else saw that text message at the time that it was sent?
No one. Of course not.
Based on your own observations, how would you describe Mr. Bettany's relationship with Ms. Heard while you and Ms. Heard were together?
Abominable.
Why was that?
Ms. Heard despised Mr. Bettany mainly because we had become such close friends, and for her he was a threat, and would take me away from her with regard to if Paul Bettany was getting the attention from me. That was a showstopper. It would cause all kinds of unpleasantries, to the point of where when we were on the island with Mr. Bettany, his wife, and his 4 children, Ms. Heard and Mr. Bettany got into some debate over lunch, and I just remember that whenever Mr. Bettany tried to make a point, she would talk over him, and then it started to get quite rude. She got mean, and she got loud, and then I believe it was his 18-year-old boy who was getting ready to go to he's a very bright, brilliant kid. He entered the conversation because this was something to do with what he'd studied in school, and he knew quite a lot about it, and he voiced his opinion, and Ms. Heard demeaned that young man to the point of where he burst into tears and walked away, and it was at that point that I had spoken to Ms. Heard and said, that's just unacceptable. That behavior is unacceptable. You have no right to demean that boy. You cannot always be right. You should try being wrong sometime, because you might learn something. And then I asked her to, I thought it was best that she leave the island.
Could we please pull up Defendant's Exhibit 245? And Mr. Depp, I believe this is another text message with Mr. Bettany that you were shown on your cross-examination. And directing your attention to the text message at the top of the page from May 30th, 2014, do you recognize this text message you sent to Paul Bettany?
Yes, I do.
And could you please describe to the jury what you are conveying to Mr. Bettany in this message?
This again is I suppose, an example of the way that I write and express myself. That is to say, you stretch your situation out to give him the understanding that you're drowning, essentially. So everything that I say here is, in fact, an impossibility for the human body. I would have been, well, I would have certainly at least had to be rushed to the hospital for a stomach pump. There's a line here that, if you don't mind, I say that when I say I'm done, I am admittedly too fucked in the head to spray my rage at the one I love, for little reason as well. I'm too old to be that guy, but pills are fine. The pills that were referenced were the pills that I that I was coming off of, and they were the only thing that could give me some semblance of the same numbing effect that I searched for as a child with my mother. And saying that I was too messed up in the head was, it's kind of like if you've been told since you were a child that everything you do is wrong, and that I shouldn't have even been alive, or whatever, joyous little treats that my then very sick, very ill mother brought to me. Ms. Heard was well aware of my past, my childhood, therefore was very adept at knowing exactly which buttons to push. So at this point, I felt like, well, I was that little boy again in my head, like, I guess I am incapable of doing anything right. I guess I will never be happy. I guess that this is who I am. I can't get along with this person. But it's confusion, It's nothing that you can. It's nothing that anyone could sustain for any length of time. It's nothing that anyone should have to sustain for any length of time when you're being demeaned, berated, judged, and treated like a lesser animal. I'm treated as if I'm only surrounded by yes men, and that I'm a bad father, and that these things are endless. They were endless, and there was no call for them. It's hard to understand why someone that is supposed to love you could be that cruel. And there's also times where you just say, okay, I'm gonna try to not have I won't fall for the argument. I won't participate in the argument. Because I knew where it would go, into her circular pattern of psychological abuse.
Mr. Depp, what do you mean when you use the term blackout in this text message?
Blackout. Yes, because I'm talking about 1,000 Red Bulls and vodkas, 1,000 of them, 2 bottles of champagne, no food for days, half a bottle of whiskey. Those things, had that been all absolutely true, would have not only caused a blackout, but it would have caused a severe alcohol poisoning, overdose. I would have had to have gone immediately. If that were true, I would have had to have been taken to a hospital, or I'd just die. So, no, blackout is when someone gets so drunk on alcohol, essentially, on alcohol. But the pills that I had my addiction, that I was addicted to, the roxycodone, which are very, very powerful opiates. Two of those would knock me out. That is to say, so there's blackout, which is you can be, a person could be wide awake and wreaking havoc, or having a giggle in a blackout and never remember it. But when you are, when you've taken the prescription medication, it knocks you out. You are certainly not, well, you're not in any condition to, first of all, swing at anyone. You are out. You go on what's called the nod, and then it takes you away into sleep. It's just very deep sleep. And I found that much more accepting than having to hear constant badgering and insults.
Mr. Depp, I'd like to show you Defendant's Exhibit 153, which I believe Mr. Rottenborn also showed you last week.
Yes.
Do you remember seeing this during Mr. Rottenborn's examination of you last week?
Yeah, yes, I do.
Okay. Now, I'd like to show you the full text exchange, which is in Plaintiff's Exhibit 120. And since there's been a number of text messages drawn from this document, this would be Plaintiff's Exhibit 120C.
Which page would that be, or underscore?
This would be 4 and 5, Your Honor.
4 and 5, thank you.
Mr. Depp, do you recognize these text messages?
Yes, I do.
Your Honor, I'd move Plaintiff's 120C into evidence and ask that it be published to the jury.
All right, 120C in evidence, publish.
Mr. Depp, who are you communicating with in these text messages?
In fact, though it says Marino, these are texts between my ex, that is to say, the Vanessa Paradis, the mother of my children. And this is again, abstract humor that we're conveying back and forth to one another. This was all, it was a joke. It certainly wasn't about Miss Heard. We didn't speak of her much together.
Do you recall what you were talking about?
I don't recall who it was. I don't recall who it was, but it was someone who had, for some reason, I think it was, I think that the possibility is that 2013. It might have been, we had a nanny at one point, who we, in fact, we had, we found her, she was caught stealing, even from my, at the time, my, maybe 10, 11-year-old boy, Jack, who was bright enough, because he knew it, he was bright enough, he had a $5 bill that he wadded up and put on his desk in his bedroom, and when he came home from school...
Your Honor, I'm just going to object on relevance. The question was, who was this about?
Yeah, we can move on.
Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Depp, I'd also like to show you Defendant's Exhibit 143, which I believe Mr. Rottenborn also showed you last week. Do you remember seeing this email exchange? You could scroll down as well, please. Thank you.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
Who are you exchanging these emails with?
Stephen Duders, who was at the time was my assistant.
And what are you and Mr. Duders discussing here?
Gobbledygook, essentially. It was, as I remember, it was a day of work, and there were times when I would send a text to Mr. Duders, because he's the worrisome type. I would send him a text in jest, of course, and to get a rise out of him, to get some reaction out of him. So, you know, I would tell him things like, you know, I woke up and I'm bleeding profusely from the inside of my ear. Is that normal? You know, it would be things like that. So this is exactly the same kind of thing. I think we were even referencing The Hangover, the film The Hangover, in part of this, about the Mike Tyson and sort of bizarre circus that I was telling him that I had in my room, and that there was blood everywhere. It was a joke to just sort of throw him off, worry him, and make. Ultimately, it was a joke, and we were laughing about it.
Mr. Depp, what, if any, portion of this email exchange is literally true?
We're all set to leave here at approximately 1:30 p.m. Hope you rested well.
Mr. Depp, I'd like to talk to you about some text messages that Mr. Rottenborn showed you where you refer to the monster, and this is in the context of in conversations with that don't include Ms. Heard. Do you remember seeing some of those communications?
Yes.
Okay. First, I'd like to show you Defendant's Exhibit 427, please, which is a text message from you to Jerry Judge. How are you using the term monster in this context when you're communicating with Mr. Judge?
The monster could essentially, the monster could, it could be two separate things. The monster in her eyes was my,
Objection as to what the monster was in Ms. Heard's eyes, Your Honor.
All right. Let's just stay as to her eyes, if you want to
Okay.
ask, rephrase.
the monster was defined by Ms. Heard as this out of control
Same objection,
thing.
Your Honor. What Ms. Heard's view of the monster was is not for this witness to say.
Mr. Depp, how do you know how Ms. Heard defined the word monster?
She said the words to me.
And what words did she say with respect to the term monster?
It was her go-to phrase, and it was the go-to phrase for me being, again, as has been embellished and elaborated, the drug use or the drink or the whatever, but the monster was, for me, and again, you start to think about these things and you put it in your own head and what the real context is. The monster was sobriety. The monster was trying to be sober because I was plagued by these requests to stop drinking. But the monster could also be if a conversation, if something starts as a conversation, which would quickly ramp up to quite an antagonizing argument, if I responded to her, if I took part in the verbal back and forth where people do in life end up saying obscenities, screaming obscenities at one another, or calling them names, or when it gets to that point, I mean, the monster was just for me, was just the guy who actually was dumb enough to continue to take part in arguments that would ultimately get nowhere. So that is one of the reasons why I would try to get away from Ms. Heard and not participate in her debates and the knowledge that she wanted to express to me, and circular and painful insults that were just constant. It was rapid fire. So I stopped participating in those. I tried to walk away. I tried to go to another room, even to the point of locking myself in rooms so that she just could pound on the door and scream. That was clearly I should have never fallen for that or taken the bait to allow myself to get into a conversation which led to an argument, which led to physical violence. It was not going to be good, so I just walk away, which drove her through the roof.
So, Mr. Depp, why would you use the term monster when communicating with people other than Ms. Heard?
Well, because I heard it all the time. I mean, it was, as I said, that was her go-to. The monster. The monster's here. The monster's back. Monster. So I would refer to the monster again in terms of with Elton or with friends Patti Smith. The monster was like with Elton. I believe it was just the monster was I let the monster creep back in or something. That is sobriety. That's what I'm telling him is I have failed. And I've had a drink, or I've been drinking. But my drinking, again, was not to excess. I would never went into blackouts or anything of that nature. I was disappointed in myself for not staying there. Although, when you are constantly in a position to be harassed by your beloved other, what else could I do? I wanted to be numb. I didn't want to hear that. I didn't want to feel that, especially from one who had professed such love for me, but gave me mostly hatred.
Your Honor, I'm about to switch subjects, so if this would be a good time for the lunch break.
All right. We started a little later, so I don't mind going a little further.
Okay.
If you want to do that, go ahead.
Mr. Depp, I'd like to show you Defendant's Exhibit 161. I believe Mr. Rottenborn showed you this last week and again today.
Yes, yes,
Do you recognize these text messages as between you and Ms. Heard?
yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Why are you informing Ms. Heard that there's a book called Disco Bloodbath?
When I texted her, 2:30 in the afternoon, I was in a bookstore, a used bookstore, or a bookstore that had a lot of first editions and things like that, which was sort of a passion. And I saw a book called Disco Bloodbath, and I thought it was a funny title. I can't say that I was necessarily referencing anything other than I thought it was a funny title, Disco Bloodbath. It sounded like a sort of a bad slasher movie to me. So I said, just thought you should know that there exists a book titled Disco Bloodbath, that's all. And then she said, we need that book. And then she asked me, is it about last Friday night by any chance? And then my answer to her, how can you make me smile about such a hideous moment? The fact is, this is a light-hearted exchange that she's even saying, we need that book. Then she makes a reference to last Friday night, which I don't recall what last Friday night was or whatever, so I just how can you make me smile about such a hideous moment? A hideous moment could have been some grotesque thing that we saw on television. It could have been anything. I don't recall now, but all I was saying is, and it even says at the end of my text, that's all. Disco Bloodbath, you know. So this was not we were not butting heads in this exchange whatsoever. It was very lighthearted.
Mr. Depp, I'd like to show you Defendant's Exhibit 375, which is another document Mr. Rottenborn showed you last week.
Yes.
Could you please remind the jury what's reflected in this photograph? This is from Australia. On March 8th, I believe it was, where after my finger had been, the tip of my finger had been taken off, I began I was in such shock, I just started writing on the mirror
on walls, and basically what these were for me to Ms. Heard were reminders of moments in our past where I had caught her, where it was revealed to me, even by her, that she had been caught in lies that she had told me. So that's what these are in reference to. The red, the lipstick that says, call Carly Simon, call Carly Simon, she said it better, babe. In reference to You're So Vain, I am imagining. But that's not, I didn't, the Carly Simon message is not mine, that's Miss Heard's.
So let's just break this down a little bit. Who wrote the text that's in black on the mirror?
That would be me.
And what does that say?
She loves, I don't know, like naked Hollywood or something. An artist of, I don't know what the rest says, but what that is Ms. Heard had come to me and she was seemed to be seriously concerned about how she was being portrayed in Hollywood. She was concerned that because she had done films where there was kind of arbitrary nudity and things of that nature, she had voiced to me that she did not want to be, she didn't want to be looked upon that way in the industry. She wanted to be able to escape the chains of being objectified by the Hollywood system, which is a difficult thing for any woman, certainly, unfortunately. But she asked me, how can I avoid being stereotyped as the beautiful blonde who gets her breasts out or goes naked and has to shtuck people in movies? And I gave her my advice on it, on how to avoid it, which I thought was pretty accurate, and her ambition was stronger than what she received from my advice, is what it was. My advice that I thought long and hard about, because I did care for her and I did understand. I didn't want her to have to do that. And early on in my career, I was put in a position where, you know, I could have gone on, I could have been just a guy who was on a TV series for a couple of years, and then, you know, what was going to be left of me was would be on lunchboxes and thermoses and posters and teen idol things, and I fought that tooth and nail because that's not who I was. So I had experienced something similar in terms of being looked upon as something that you're not, and so I fought against it in the very beginning, and it worked out for me for a while there, and I was giving her basically the same advice.
Now, Mr. Depp, you said that you did not write this portion that's in red here that says Carly Simon said it, call Carly Simon, she said it better, babe. Is that right?
Yes, no, that's not mine.
How do you know that it was Miss Heard that wrote that?
Objection, lack of foundation.
overruled, I'll make an answer.
There are, first it looks like it's trying to match my handwriting, but my handwriting is a lot more of a scribble. And also there's another photograph of this where she went in to make sure that there were, that the red was more prominent. I believe there's also a napkin down there where
Objection,
someone...
Your Honor, lack of foundation. He's referring to exhibits that aren't in evidence and
All right,
have no idea whether they even exist.
I'll sustain the objection now. Next question?
Do you recall whether the lipstick writing was on the mirror when you wrote in the black paint?
No, of course not, no.
Mr. Depp, I'd like to show you one of the text messages that Mr. Rottenborn showed you concerning the injury to your finger. So if we could please pull up Defendant's Exhibit 398. This is a text message from you to Dr. Kipper that I believe Mr. Rottenborn showed you on cross-examination. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay. And why are you apologizing to Dr. Kipper in this message?
I believe that at that point in my brain and in my life and in my heart, I was completely and utterly frustrated with how I was living my life, and I had some disagreement with Dr. Kipper, and I was apologizing to him for having gone against his wishes, or gone against his advice, let's say.
What did you mean when you said, I have chopped off my left middle finger as a reminder that I should never cut my right finger off again?
It's my way of dealing with a painful situation. It's my way of dealing with a painful situation where I resort to humor. So I had lost the tip of my right finger, and so I'm saying to him, I've now cut off my left finger to remind me never to cut my right finger off again. That's not, I mean, when you say I got my finger cut off, or I cut my finger off, or this or that, it doesn't necessarily mean that you did it yourself. And again, I'm a guitarist and have been since I was 12, and that was the only piece that I found in my life at the age of 12 where I knew I knew who I could escape into music and learn music. And the last thing, I still play the guitar it's still my first love, aside from my children. It's still my first love. There's no reason in the world why I literally would cut my own finger off to ruin this beautiful opportunity that I was given at 12 to learn how to play the guitar. Again, why would I start lopping off digits in my 50s if I, as Mr. Rottenborn suggests, am a kind of, walking tantrum? When I was younger, why wouldn't I just start chopping off fingers or some kind of, why would I ruin the only thing that was really good in my life aside from my children? So when this finger went, the tip of this finger went, the only thing I could think in my mind was, thank God it wasn't the left hand, which is the fret hand. I'm right-handed, so that's the fret. That's where the fretboard is. If you lose a finger from your left hand, I'm not Django Reinhardt, who had only 2 fingers to play with. If I'd have lost a finger from here, I would have had to relearn how to play the guitar all over again. It's just not the case. Even though I say I've chopped my finger off, it's like saying, I bumped into a knife or something. It's not. I'm not admitting to. I think if I was going to admit to someone that I actually chopped my finger off, this text wouldn't be as it is. I think it would have been a long explanation as to why I got to that point. But no, I can't take responsibility for what I now call Little Richard, my chopped finger.
Mr. Depp, at the time that you sent this text message to Dr. Kipper, had you told him what had actually happened to your right finger?
Oh yes, yeah.
And when did you tell him that?
He was aware of that day, the day that it happened. Malcolm was aware of it. Jerry was aware of it. Stephen was. Everyone was aware of it. And of course, yes, when I went to the doctor, the emergency room, I lied to them because I didn't think it wise to cause a ruckus, implicate Miss Heard, and then have 8 million stories out in the press about how she'd thrown a bottle of vodka at me, and it smashed all the bones in the tip of my finger and cut off about, well, it was all sliced down through. You've seen the pictures. It was pretty horrible. It was, and I didn't want to put her in that situation. I didn't want to put any of us in that situation. I didn't want to put the film in that situation. That was why I said it was crushed in an accordion door, and it was only the second doctor who actually told me what he was.
Your Honor, hearsay.
I haven't finished my sentence. How do you know?
I'll overrule for the moment. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Should I? Thank you. It was the emergency room doctor was first. The next day I went to see a specialist, a hand surgeon, and this was still in Australia. And he had recognized that my excuse for the finger being gone.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay. What the doctor conveyed to him about his thoughts on the finger injury. That's classic hearsay.
Your Honor, it's in the context of medical treatment.
No, I'll sustain that objection.
Your Honor, I think this is
That's
a
good.
good stopping
All
point.
right.
Yes.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and take our hour lunch recess. Again, do not do any outside discussions, and don't talk to each other about it, okay? And we'll see you after lunch, okay? If everybody in the courtroom could still be quiet, please. Court is in session. Thank you. All right, so we can take a recess till 2:20. Just for planning purposes, though, I plan to go to 5:30 today since we had a late start. So just to let you know, and I know you plan on having a remote witness, which is fine. Just let us know so we can set that up. But also make sure your remote witness knows that this is a courtroom. I don't expect them to be any outside noises or anything else going on, and direct attention. And also if they would know that if there's an objection, for them to hold off answering until that's resolved. That goes for all remote witnesses when we get to them, okay? All right. See you at 2:20 then. Thank you.
Thank you.